Graham, you're an artist and a director, over 15 years experience. You've worked with Netflix, you've worked with Warner, you've worked with big bands like Coldplay, musicians like Ed Sheeran and Justin Bieber. Where are you born? And like, how have you ended up doing that from Northern Ireland?
I was born here in Belfast at the Royal Hospital, as I guess half of the people are. And well, I loved photography. I guess that's kind of where my creativity started. My dad gave me a camera when I was about 10. And so I started taking pictures. And then I went to school in town and the darkroom was broken. So they sent me to Belfast Exposed. So I said I got a sort of pseudo apprenticeship because I could just go there in my 6th year and do my art there. And there were some amazing photographers in there, Mervyn and Seamus. And they'd like look at my prints in the darkroom and just be like, that's terrible. Come here and I'll show you how to do it better. Like, let's dial in some red and let's, just make this work. So I learned a lot from them, I guess, just about, composition, photography. Also, I think they had this rule where if you left the studio without a camera, you had to like make the coffees for the day. So that was never really like enforced too harshly, but it was also, I guess, this idea that creativity is all around us.
Yeah.
And it's having the eye to see it and the patience to capture it is actually a large part of the process. And if you have the perspective that what you're going to see is significant and that you can capture that in a way that's valuable for other people, I think that the essence of those kinds of maxims or perspectives is really what begins. Actually was looking at photos last night and it was Vincent Van Gogh, as they said in LA.
Do it, man.
But there was a great quote from him about, the hardest part is starting. And I think that is often the case that people, you can read that and I can tell you some of the stories how that is true, but it's not as impressive in that, like, whenever you're getting an email at like 10 p.m. on a Friday because there's something wrong with a lyric video you made for Ed Sheeran, it's not as glamorous as that sounds. It's not like me and Ed were kicking it for 2 weeks on the beach and we happened to shoot a little music video. It's like, I did do an Easter Monday with David Guetta that I loved and I met him and, so I have met some amazing people, but it's all incremental. It's all little tiny changes. So you do one little thing and people like it and then you do more of that thing and then maybe you do a different thing, but it's a very slow journey of step by step by step. So it is like taking photos. I learned that I like that, and then I end up scanning images for Belfast Exposed and teaching Photoshop. And so that opened, like at 16, they paid me probably like 30 quid for an hour teaching or something. And I was like, whoa, you can make a lot of money in this.
Yeah.
And they also like the quota for that scanning, they quoted it on a different scanner than I use. So I could do my day's work so much faster because the scanner, and I was fast in Photoshop. So I guess I just learned how you could explore and do different things, and the rules were much more malleable, it felt, in the creative, because I also washed dishes in Nick's Warehouse, which was an amazing restaurant.
Nick's Warehouse?
Nick's Warehouse.
Mate, that's goated. Unbelievable.
Yeah. There's a bunch of my friends. I was actually Ben, who's films by Ben, who's an amazing local director and filmmaker. He's the son of Nick. And so me and a bunch of his mates were the dishwashers when we were 16. So anyway, I don't know where I was going with that.
I'm going to do a Northern Irish thing where I believe that Films by Ben is married to Danielle Morgan, who is Flax Fox, who works in St. George's Market, who was my first ever local client.
Amazing.
So shout out to Danielle. I think like maybe the second guest ever on the podcast as well. So yeah,
she's an amazing human too.
She's incredible. Yeah. And an artist.
Oh, a serious artist.
And like, when did you first properly like grasp the identity of an artist? And was that like a sudden thing for you, or was that like a gradual thing you had to work up to?
Really gradual. Like I still struggle with that title now. I'm also privileged being friends with like Francis McCrory, who is an incredible, painting artist. And so I think even like on reflection, like my startup journey was amazing and I'm really proud of what we created, but ultimately it wasn't a financial success, the business. And as I reflected on that, I was like, maybe I was building a technology company around my creativity because I didn't have the courage to say my creativity is enough on its own.
Right.
So it's been a constant journey, and it still is. I love the term artist, and I love like Kandinsky's view of art as there's a triangle of society and the artist should be on the point of the triangle progressing society and should not target understanding in their own generation. They should do stuff that's so out there that nobody gets them at all. And maybe 1 or 2 generations later, if they've done their job well, they'll be like, wow, that person was really onto something. So, like that type of art that is, a very like holistic, cohesive, like the journey, the direction of what we as humanity should be aiming for. Like that, to me, art in that sense, for my understanding, there's like a, Cubism and some of that movement was some of it's beautiful and incredible, of course, but there was like almost this disconnect where art became much more self-orientated and nihilistic to a degree. And so there was this disconnection of the responsibility of the artist from their audience. And it was more about self-expression, which isn't in any way to devalue it, but it's just to say that almost as a philosophy of why we create, I like that idea that the purpose of the creation has a broader goal. Like I did visuals in nightclubs and I was like, well, you know what? Somebody's here. I've worked in factories and I know how difficult it is to do that. So if I'm here and I get the opportunity to create art that somebody's come and spent a portion of their wage to be here and they're going to do that next week again, then I should at least try and make them have fun or bring them some goodness and life and energy to their Friday or Saturday night. So they're like more energized for dealing with whatever it is they have to do. So I think there's that sense of there's an opportunity in creativity to inspire that really excites me. And that's maybe the thread that's run through the various different types of expression that I've used. But yeah, artist is I think it can be such a trigger point for people. But it's ironic, I think, also in a way, because right now, like, I'm not sure the exact statistic, but fundamentally more than half of the people in Northern Ireland who work for the government.
Yeah.
And they do a lot of very respectable, boring jobs. Not boring, sorry, that's not a helpful term. They do a lot of jobs that people would be ultimately like, he's a civil servant, he's a good man.
Yeah. Like stereotypically perceived as boring.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
But actually, whereas an artist who's seen as someone who's like fairy and not doing anything like productive, perhaps, actually, their contribution can be so much more valuable. And I think I think there's a really interesting point to transition now where I hope and believe that the culture in Belfast is much more realizing its identity as creatives and artists and storytellers. And that's super exciting to me because if you look at the impact of Ireland and the world, Northern Ireland, Belfast, whatever way you describe these places, like it's massive, and its stories and its creativity and its poems and its books and its writings. And there've been a few great inventions too, but fundamentally, I think the creative output of here is what has driven the most value. And that is something that is so much more present in our like baseline human being than people realize. Like having been to LA, having been to all these parts of the world, you realize, the guys working in Netflix are people from like Nebraska and Iowa, like the Warren Points and the Ballymoneys, and like they're not glamorous places. These are not some like they're not
the Warren Point of the States is such a bar.
It's like they're not born with sunglasses on, stacks of cash. They're just normal people who come to a creative place, learn a trade, and they are part of a powerful ecosystem. But fundamentally, there's no difference between them. In fact, to my point, they're less likely to know great stories because there's less of a rich cultural heritage of storytelling in Iowa or Nebraska, for my limited understanding. So it's like, actually, we've got the raw ingredients of this really powerful ability to influence the world. And there is a challenge in going from raw talent to excellent outcome. And that is the journey of an artist or a creative. For me, it's like learning your craft to the point where you can express your inspiration well enough for people to be excited by it.
Right.
So I think that's, really that's what's exciting me about Belfast at the minute. I think there's this, there's so much more talent and creativity and depth and breadth of talent across so many different art forms and into different technology outcomes. But I feel like there's this greater belief that we can do something amazing. And that's really exciting to me. And it's actually different, than other places. There's obviously an energy in LA around certain parts, but I didn't feel the same like I feel a greater optimism in Belfast almost than I did there.
Yeah.
And certainly like New York, I was there briefly, and there's always an energy in New York that's incredible, and I love that city. But I also just think there's less as well in Belfast in terms of that broader creative output of like a defined route, or like in LA, the studios control the film industry. So that's a real strong influence on the output. Whereas here, there's not that same kind of hierarchical structure in place. There's a lot of funding available, and there's a lot of people creating great stuff, and there's no big, huge boss saying this is right, this is wrong. So I think that gives us the opportunity to be more creative and more punk and more experimental. And fundamentally, one of the most important parts of creative growth is experimentation.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what's going to work, and you don't know, cinema was people like trying to make these devices work, trying to capture stage in a way it could be shared. And suddenly it's like, whoa, this camera can do a million other things. We can tell all these different stories now. And it's like, we've got sort of spatial and VR and XR, and there's these new formats and cultural experiences. And I don't believe our children are going to be going to a room to look at a letterbox as their like highest form of corporate cultural experience. So what's that other experience? What's that new thing? It's probably a blend of a load of stuff that's happening right now and some things nobody's thought of. But the fastest way there is going to be the place that can experiment the most dramatically, the most fearlessly, the most freely.
Yeah.
And so I think in that sense, here, Belfast is a very like exciting place.
Yeah. And this is why I love this series. This is why I love chatting to guys like you who have their hearts and their origin stories deeply rooted in this place, and have also experienced maybe the broadening of horizon that comes from like living and working overseas. Like you said, like you spend a lot of time in LA, and like this whole series, like we like to talk to interesting people from Northern Ireland who've lived and worked and overseas, and particularly people who like moved back home. So this series with NI Connections, it's basically like to inspire local people that actually there's amazing things going on here locally, and there's amazing opportunities globally. And there is kind of this returner movement that's happening where we see lots of like really, really like world-class Northern Irish talent who have lived overseas for like an extended period of time, who are like starting to move back home. And I agree with you, there is like this amazing energy to Belfast. And so, yeah, like just want to thank NI Connections for sponsoring this episode. So NI Connections, they are the diaspora department of Invest NI, and their mission really simply is to connect the Northern Irish community around the world. You have recently moved back after some time away, and we'll get into that a little bit later on, but they've put together like loads of incredible resources for how to move you and your family back home if you've lived overseas, how to move to Northern Ireland for the first time if you've never lived here before, how to move a business or open up a new branch in Northern Ireland if you're one of our many international listeners. And we've been doing this series with them for like, I think 3+ years. There's over like, is it 30 or 40 interviews in the series now? And so if you want to check out all the episodes in that series, you can go to niconnections.com, which is also where you can sign up for their free email newsletter to get new stories on a weekly basis and really helpful resources as they make them and share them with everyone. So Graham, why do you think it was the visual medium that really grabbed your attention as an artist? Like, why do you think it wasn't like you picked up a paintbrush and you were like, yes, this is my thing, this is my thing? Why was it when you picked up the camera that you think that gave you the specific dopamine hit that was, carefully constructed for your specific brain that like took you down this path? I guess it's a really roundabout way of asking, like, why do you love what you love?
Yeah, I think there's something about light to me that is incredibly beautiful. And I love the description that photography is painting with light. And so much of cinematography is light. And personally, I love the feeling of being like under the surface of a sea and the sunlight's coming through the water and you close your eyes, and there's this amazing feeling of like the weightlessness of the water, but the sunlight sort of like dancing through the water onto your eyelids, and it creates a great sense of peace or calm for me. And I think that sense of wanting to bring someone else into that experience, to allow them to know that there's like a moment of peace, of calm, of safety, of where you're special, you're safe, you're loved, you are like, for me, the water's a really safe place. It's a really like calming place. So it's like you're encircled in this safe, warm, beautiful, weightless place with sunlight on your body. Like, that's such a beautiful experience. And so really a desire to share that with people, I suppose, or to encounter that together as well. I think part of, like, I did the photography stuff, and then I would be out. I loved electronic music, and I'd be out and I'd be somewhere where I'd be hearing great music, and I'd look and there'd be a screen that would be like completely disconnected, and it would like really jar with me and take me out of the experience. And I was like, why is that not helping me experience this more? Like, there's an opportunity here that's being missed. And so that's how I got into doing live visuals. Was like, okay, how do you do that? How do you make that? And then this idea of like kinetic visual performance, you know, like Kandinsky and some of those guys painted pieces of music, but you're like, is this one frame covering the whole piece, or is this a particular part of that? Or, you know, where is there parts of this painting? It's hard to interpret one image for a whole piece of music. And then experimental film was a big step forward, or film in general, because it's moving. So you've got that time-based element, but you don't have improvisation, which is one of the most exciting parts of live music for me. Is it's whenever somebody does something different that's not in the recorded music. Yeah. So that was really something that intrigued me. Like, how do I improvise visually in real time? How do we create something that lives and dies in this moment? And the wonderful, like, we're here together now, and this moment is all we live anyway, but when you're in that,
it's heightened. You feel it more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a Russian composer called Sheeran who believed the perfect performance of sight, sound, scent, and dance in the Himalayas would summon Armageddon.
Huh.
Unfortunately, or unfortunately, he died before he got to execute that performance, but he was working towards it. So it's that idea of like, in this moment, we can create something that's of this moment and lives and dies in this moment. And so that drew me into VJing, and I did an amazing course at the Urban Arts Academy, and shout out to Adam Turkington for making that happen back in the day, where I learned about, you know, it was like a boot camp in filmmaking and animation and editing, and then using the software that allowed you to do all this like real-time responsive visuals and effects. And then I added all that to a bunch of stuff I was learning about coding and processing frequencies, and tried to create this experience where you could have frequencies being processed to create visual responses to them, and then you could layer on manual interaction and different elements, and even sometimes things just like visual feedback, like feeding the image back in itself and creating these like layering, like slightly unpredictable elements where you were just sort of playing with these signals, playing with these algorithms, playing with all this different stuff, but somehow it all seemed to fit and make sense with what was happening. So yeah, I really, really loved that. And it's such an amazing medium for feedback, because it's like, if you're on a dance floor and you're doing visuals and people are not getting it, it's very obvious.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, if you can manage to help draw people in and on to the dance floor, then you know that you're doing a good job. And there was just always this sense of like, you could just feel it building. And I think that's one of the amazing things about people here as well. They are very committed to like the dance floor, and you know, people used to turn the lights on, and you know, it's 2 a.m, 3 a.m, 6 a.m, whatever time, there's mascara down girls' faces, lads are fully doused in sweat, and they're shouting one more tune, they don't care.
Yeah.
You know, so I think in the sort of everybody giving themselves to the experience together, there was something really fun and beautiful in those moments.
Absolutely. So you end up, I mean, you have this incredible career, and then you start to get into a lot of the kind of virtual side of things. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I think there's an amazing freedom there. whenever you do a physical space performance show, whatever it is, like you can only put so many screens up on the walls. Or you can only project, you know what I mean? You've got a limitation to how much of the world you can control. Whereas whenever you go into a fully virtual space, you're then, you know, you can sculpt that landscape for as far as your eyes can see in every direction. You can bring in, you know, the lighting. You can take control of the sun. You can, you know, have anything happen. You can use fractals to create these mad geometries that can't exist. They're not possible to build. And so you begin then to create these other worlds and be able to share those other worlds with people. So I think it's an extension of the world, but it gives you more creative freedom. And that's really the attraction, I think, is being able to bring people into another world. And I also think there's an opportunity there in that it's like the suspension of disbelief in film, you know. You can do it in film too. It's like you take people into another world and they forget everything. Yeah. And so there's this blank canvas where we're all together in this new place. And what does this new place look like? And what are the rules of it? And what does it mean? And what does it mean? You know, every sci-fi is a expansion of your own self and delving into what's in there. So it's the same, I guess, opportunity to consider everything with a level of abstraction that will then let you process what's happening in your normal reality, I guess, in a different way. So there's a lot to it, but I think that sense of like liminal space for me is something that's really interesting. Like the mind and the intellect are great at processing numbers and like coming to conclusions, but when it comes to things like destiny and love and the future of the universe, logic and reason become way less helpful, in my opinion, than sort of insight or being able to explore a kind of spiritual experience or something that's beyond that very reasonable reality and something that's much more metaphysical. And I think we have the opportunity in transitioning into a completely created world to also leave behind some of those limitations or some of those barriers that we might have if we're just considering like a still life painting.
Do you see, so you talk about the pros, do you see any cons to the virtual world? Because on one hand, it's full access to all this like new form of creativity and suspension of disbelief. Do you think we as humans, is there any risk of like losing something in that process?
I think it all depends on the context in which, you know, I love to be outside in the real world. I love to be in the water and I love to be like on the streets and feel the rain on my skin. So I love the tactile elements of our reality a lot. And I don't think I'd ever like transition into some like virtual experience or virtual first version of reality. Yeah. I guess if you build so complex a world or so beautiful a world virtually, there's a danger that people can come less, you know, connected to the real world and to real people. And that is not a good thing, of course. I think people need people and people need hugs and all those other things that I think if the virtual space becomes, you know, it can be, I guess, a place of escape and isolation in the same way that it can be a place of beauty and connection. But I think that's the same, like from, they made Nintendo Entertainment Systems and Game Boys, like, you know what I mean? Or books even, like, you know, you could sit and read books all day and not go and see a real human being if you wanted to. So it's maybe more compelling. And maybe, I guess the danger is that younger people might experience it at an earlier stage and therefore struggle to know how to balance those two, perhaps. Yeah. But ultimately, it's like anything. I think people have to make good choices and parents have to teach their kids. Like, you know, I say online safety is like teaching your kid to cross the road. Yeah. It's like there's a bunch of fast objects zooming past your house every day, and if you get it wrong, it'll hurt you. But if I hold your hand and show you where good stuff is, then hopefully you'll make good choices whenever you get the chance to run out across the road yourself.
It's a really, really good point. You know, we were talking off air, like we both have young kids. How do you, something that we try to navigate is like, at that young age, how do you give them digital literacy and make sure that you're like really empowering them and enable them for the future, like the, I was going to say the future technological world. We already are living in it, so I don't know why I'm like talking about it as if it's like far away thing versus maybe trying to hold on to, rightly or wrongly, like this desire for like a very earthy, like go in the back garden, run around the fields sort of like experience that maybe some of us had growing up.
Yeah. Well, when you said that, I thought of a quote from, there's a modern day mystic called John Moriarty, and he talked about deepest instinct and highest insight. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like, to me, trying to train a human being to be a good human being or journey that with them is about both that thing. It's like you need to have that raw guttural instinct where you can run and rage and wrestle and fight and, you know, just be very like almost primal. To be honest, I think there should be more space for that in our young people's lives and rites of passages and the opportunity to know you've transitioned into manhood or womanhood and what does that actually look like. But I think more specifically, and then highest insight then is like, how do I capture light in a way I can share? How do I create things that are beautiful? Maybe how do I learn to code so I can do that? And is that going to be part of the future? Up for debate right now, I think. But yeah, it's
because of AI or what?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
You know, whether you'll just be good at prompting them to write good code or whether, I mean, obviously you'll probably still need to fix it because I don't trust computers that much. But I think it's like there's this tension between like, do I make them these like ninja kids on computers or do I make them like these like
real
children
of
the earth? Yeah. And I think the answer is both to the best of what you can.
Sure.
And let them enjoy and explore both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's like a framework that I heard a few years ago. I'm probably like taking it totally out of context, but I've internalized it this way where it's like there's like a desire to be a prophet, which is to like try to return to the past and try to like go back to like a period of time where it's like, you know, there was no technology and there was no evils that come with technology and all this sort of stuff. But then there's also this other kind of path that it's like, well, we can't go back. The genie is out of the bottle. So it's like, how do we like find like a new future where, as you say, we can hold both those things in tension where it's like, it doesn't have to be a Inception, Matrix, Ready Player One dystopian future. Can we have basically both? And I think the way they described it was like a wizard. It's like someone who can like take the old and kind of like merge it with the new and like take science and kind of like have innovative thought moving forward. And I kind of like a few years ago, even like in older episodes of this podcast, would have been very on the Luddite sort of side of things. I think now I'm kind of like, no, we have to find a new way. Like this is part of our lives. This is part of who we are. This is part of all of our jobs. Every single person in this building, every single person in the city, like we are already plugged in every single day to some extent. So I think I'm really interested in like in that third way that you're talking about of how do you hold both in the hand and how do you have the maturity and I think the ability to do the dance.
And I think technology is an interesting concept because things like oils or stuff like that can be considered
a
technology.
Book is a form of technology.
Yeah. Socrates bemoaned, the creation of the paper and papyrus or the scribe. He said no one will remember anything anymore. They'll just write it all down. So there's always been this tension between the convenience of technology and the expectation of a better other way. But I think it is both. And I think that, to be honest, like I think that, the world, your view on the world is really, I think, a matter of perspective too. Like if you watch Hollywood movies, we're definitely heading for a dystopian apocalypse. But if you actually look at the numbers, like there's more people have access to literacy and food and water than ever before. There's not huge need in many parts of the world, but actually as a global society, there's many really interesting and encouraging things. So if and that's really where I think storytelling and that idea of being able to transition and cover both worlds is, if you don't become a storyteller, then you're bound to listen to the stories of others.
Right.
And if they don't happen to represent holistically the world as it is or all the possibilities, then you're stuck with these stories that are framing up a bad future. And that is fundamentally, it's not the director's fault, because those directors are probably, but if you consider actually the social economic status of so many of the very few people who direct Hollywood movies that become global releases, we're actually looking through this really, really small lens at ultimately quite a small part of the world too.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a massive need for much broader stories to be told by much more different people around the world. And that's the exciting thing about the democratization of technology and more people being able to tell better stories. And even to a degree, you know, virtual spaces, even things like Fortnite Islands and things like you can get whatever. I could only get 20,000 people at a gig I ever did a good job at, or maybe 100,000 you can get to a big festival, but you get 9 million people to a gig in Fortnite. And you can make an island for you and 300 people, and they might all love that island and build it together. And, you know, we've had this, because of the cost of distribution, we have this expectation that to tell a good story looks a certain way.
Yeah.
You know, it's a major label signing your song. It's a major distribution for a feature film. But actually, if you can tell good stories that influence 100 people, and that shapes your immediate locality or slightly shapes a bunch of different localities, is that maybe not more powerful? If you can continue to tell that story and engage in a dialogue that's making a positive impact, is that not much more impactful than, you know, a feature film that lives and dies? Maybe you write a Star Wars and it lives in culture for a longer period of time. But most movies, like, how many movies did you watch last year and how many do you remember?
Man, that's a great question. I mean, I was even just thinking about, like, you know, the top 100, pick any list, pick IMDb or whatever you want to go for. And it's like, how many movies didn't make it on the list? Do you know what I mean?
And cost £400 million, which how many people could have been drinking water? You know, and you know what I mean? I'm not saying that I really believe in funding art, but there's opportunities now to tell stories in different ways and really, and I think that's where it comes back to, you know, being an artist or having a perspective on your goal for your art beyond the voices of those around you in your immediate circumstances. And that's where I think maybe there still is the need for transition in culture here, because people have been, you know, that was one thing I really enjoyed about American culture. It's like, you're expected to go for it and do something new and nobody's going to stop you.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it's like people don't expect, previously, maybe people have not expected to do anything great and would much rather to stop anybody trying than have a go themselves. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, in America, it's like it's the local hardware store is sponsoring the local 9-year-olds baseball team, because there's no expectation there's going to be a funding body or some government agency is going to do it. It's like, if we don't do it, no one's going to do it.
Right.
So let's all do it. And so that part of American culture, I think, super valuable and helpful, and really is something that I think the attitudes are shifting to what's possible here. But I don't know if the broader, like, enabling of the society has shifted enough yet, where it's like, yes, you have a good idea, go and do something new. Because, and that was my attitude when I graduated. I was like, you know what, I'm going to try and do something myself. And if I fail, the actual impact of my career path is going to be minimal. Because in 15 years time, my graduate job will be the same as ultimately it is now. So if I go and try something myself and fail horribly, it's not going to leave that bad. And that's the other thing, people are afraid to fail. And, you know, ultimately failure is the best way to learn. And you learn so much in failing to take forward that it's always valuable to take a shot. I mean, yes, you can end up losing a lot of money, and you can lose some other people's money too, which isn't a good thing to do. But if you do it in good faith, if you try and make something and it doesn't work out, it's actually not the end of the world.
Right.
You know, the average millionaire's gone bankrupt like 1.2 times or something impossible like that. So it's, you know, to do well, you have to risk much, and the risk much you're going to fail. But if you don't give up, in the persistence is where, you know, whatever level of success or what your definition of success, I believe, is. And it's that choice to try again. It's that choice to go. and fail and go again. That's really how to make something good.
Yeah. So you were in London for a while?
Yes.
And then you were in LA for a while. What brought you away from home and what brought you back?
Initially, we went to London. My wife's an amazing choreographer and movement specialist, and we went for her to go to Laban, which is an amazing conservatoire for contemporary dance. So that was why we originally left Belfast. And then we liked London, I guess, or chose to stay. She started a company and my startup continued there. So we were based there for a while. And then it was really feeling like we were meant to go to LA was what took us away from London. We were back in Belfast just for a few months in that transition. And then we were in LA for a few months and really enjoyed it. And it wasn't like we sat around and thought, oh, it'd be nice and sunny in LA, let's go. It was just that feeling of the journey of faith or destiny where we felt like that was what we were meant to do. And that was what we were being called to do. So we chose to like make the sacrifices to make that possible. And there was miracles along the way, things that, wouldn't likely have happened. And so we were there then for a period of time and we had to come back because we didn't have a visa. And then I expected to be straight back out there, but it took about 3 years. And then it was again just that feeling of this is what we're meant to do, not really for the sun or for, you know what I mean? It wasn't any of the obvious reasons, although they're obviously nice. I love the sun. Most people do. So it was that sense of where we're meant to be. And that's where we went. And then when we came back, it was again, so we were in upstate New York. We'd been in LA, Santa Barbara, and we were in upstate New York. And all of those steps we'd taken as we just felt like this is the time to do this. We should go here and do that. And so, yeah, it was like they were hard choices too, because you've got 2 kids and you're trying, like, even from California to New York, that was a huge transition. It's a completely different culture. Everything looks different. The roads look different. The people are different, so they were all huge like moves whenever we did each one of them. But it was just this kind of belief that was the best thing to do, was to follow what we felt like. We both believe in Jesus in a way that's, I think it's connected with that, like the beginning of all things, like the love that's inside every person. It's not so connected with church or a sense of organized religion, but it's more a person who is love and an origin of love that every person has. And in that connection is where we find the guidance to go and do those things. And that's why we came home too. We just didn't quite feel it in that part of New York. A lot of it was to do with the schools and our kids, but it was just this sense, this feeling, this guidance. And that's really how I've made a lot of the choices. I wouldn't have chosen or had the courage to do many things I've done. I hadn't had that sense of a guidance or a leading to do it.
Yeah.
So it's helped me take a lot of risks, I think. But yeah, fundamentally, it's normally that sense of feeling led is why I do things that I do or make choices that I make.
Sure. So, in the hero's journey, sorry, my throat. In the hero's journey, they talk about like sharing the elixir. So like once the hero is like gone off, they like come back home with like some sort of like treasure or like, the skull of a dragon or like something. Like that faith journey that you talked about of like moving your family away from the green grass of home. What was the benefit, or like what did you learn, or like what do you feel like you've come back with?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's actually a challenging question because there's still cost in that trip and parts of it are somewhat unresolved. But I think fundamentally it is that belief in ourselves and our ability to do something. And I think sometimes that does come in going and seeing. The first time I went away for creativity, I went to Miami to the Winter Music Conference. I'd actually been there before with 24/7 prayer and experienced it. It's like a real mecca of international dance music culture in Miami. It's absolutely mental. It's a beautiful, crazy place to be. But I went there and I got a gig. I went out with the smallest gig in a hotel and I ended up getting like a small stage at the Ultra Music Festival. So I got to do the after party. So I played like Fabu and Groove Rider, which at the time were heroes. And I was like downloading a software license in the hotel lobby. It was really like, but I, even though I knew I wasn't very good, I learned that the other people's things weren't that much better than me. And I think in being in America that time, it was that sense that going, like I was in the Netflix building on Sunset Boulevard and having lunch with people who were, creating these influential content, whether you like or don't like Netflix, it's a global cultural influence. And I was surrounded by very normal people who were from normal backgrounds, and they're talented and they're amazing. And it was a pleasure and a privilege to be there. But it wasn't so different from being in this space right now or being in other places I've been around the world. And so I think that's the elixir, is you can do it. Whatever that thing is that you hope to be able to do, you can. Literally nobody is stopping you. People get so worked up about politics and about funding and about all these kinds of things. But really, when it comes down to it, is any of those things really stopping you from taking the next step in front of you?
Yeah.
And if you focus on that, you might find yourself a lot farther along, a lot less stressed out than worried about, you know what I mean? No political leader's actually sitting at the end of your desk telling you can't do something. And if you make something really powerful that tells a story, you might make them think. And that might be a way better way of dealing with how you're feeling than moaning about it on Facebook or TikTok or whatever.
So like we were chatting about Belfast in the coffee shop in Napoleon before recording. And like I love your real passion for like the history of Belfast and like how this place and Northern Ireland as a whole, like there is a deep heritage here. There is deep creativity. We are a people who have made things and pushed things forward, kind of like what you were talking about earlier. What do you what is your vision for Belfast in terms of, like, do you think it should try to become like the Hollywood of Europe? Do you think it should try to be like a little bit more niche and like specialized in something? Is it big production? Is it virtual production? Is it everything? Is it just, let's just have a crack at it and see what happens?
Yeah, I don't think it should be the Hollywood of Europe in the sense that it should be its own thing, and it should have, I think that's the most powerful thing about the history of here. Like even going back farther than the Titanic and thinking of like I live near Nendrum, which is a monastic site. In like 400 AD, they invented a tidal mill, which as far as I know and as far as the plaque says, the first known tidal mill in the world. So here were these guys who'd like dandered up the road from presumably Downpatrick, found an island with no running water, decided to set up a community there, and then sooner or later realised it'd be a lot easier if we had some mills for our flour, so let's figure out how to harness this tidal energy that's on our doorstep every day. And they made something, that was unique in the world at the time. So I think it's that kind of thing. It's like, what's the story that you have to tell? What's on your heart, and how do you tell that? So I think there's a really interesting mix of different creative capabilities. Virtual production is very powerful and that allows you to tell a story set anywhere here. And so that gives a unique opportunity for generating global IP on this soil in a way that's not been possible before. Because if it didn't look like Game of Thrones, it's hard to film here.
Yeah.
But that's removed with a stage. You can create any world and you can film any story anywhere. Or you can film something that is really, really from here, but you can go back in time and you can change so many of the things that are possible, but normally require a larger budget right now. So I think it's that blend of all of the different parts of what's available and the creativity of the people here and stories and music and everything coming together. So I think it's really about people trying to do something authentic and new and just experimenting over and over again. That's what will generate something of value for me. It's like, is this connecting with people? Is this causing them to feel something? Is this making the world a better place? Those are like my things that are important to me. So that's, to me, successful creativity is doing some of that. And so I've no doubt Studio Ulster and facilities like that will be used by large international studios. And I also believe that this will, in the next couple of years, I hope lead to heads of department from here, and then just the development of a stronger industry from here, so that stories can be, told. Like I said before, it doesn't have to be a major feature with distribution to be a successful story from my point of view.
Yeah.
But it is cool if you can get that level of exposure for your storytelling. And right now that's hard. So if there's a more developed industry, it potentially be easier. And that all helps build an ecosystem, which that's the one great thing about some of those places where there are major studios. The ecosystem for telling the stories well and helping that to have impact on people is something that would be helpful, I think. But I do think, I don't know, there's an interesting dynamic in streamers versus TV versus feature films and the commercialization of all of those types. And I do think in the next 10 years, it's going to be really challenging for that whole machine to continue turning. And in the challenges of that is opportunities. And for here, there's going to be really those opportunities to innovate and do something different. So I don't think anybody should build a new Hollywood, because I think Hollywood's going to have to change quite dramatically.
Right.
But I think we can tell some great stories here and tell them really well. And who knows what that might lead to.
And so as budgets get tighter and tighter and tighter, you actually see that there's a great opportunity through new innovative technologies like virtual productions and things like that, that actually we could almost ride that next wave, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and even in beyond the sense of a feature film or a TV series or a, understanding what this new form of storytelling is in spatial or virtual experiences. At the minute, the storytelling is very focused on that linear content. And I don't think linear content, I think the technologies around us afford much less linear storytelling. And so developing how to use non-linear storytelling in a way that has a mass audience or has mass participation, I think that's a really interesting topic to consider. And we both know Matthew and Play Human's a really interesting thing around that area where what if you involve people much more in the creation and you create spirals of story, not linear stories. And what does that even mean? We don't know, but it's if you just have if you have this goal of a linear story, you're not going to tell a spiral story or a 360 story you have to, and I think things, this little Pokemon Go, very successful, very spatial, little hints and clues and breadcrumbs of actually, there's something here.
Yeah. Even
within Epic themselves, Epic and virtual production, the last couple of releases, they went really big on the virtual production features. And in 5.4, the most recent one, they were less so on it. And I think that's partly to do with adoption, partly to do with different things. But fundamentally, within their ecosystem, it's the gaming side of their product that is the more successful.
Yeah.
And Disney just invested all that money in them because not to create linear content, to create things in that world.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, to me, a much more viable future, is these kind of participatory, collaborative experiences. And I don't know how to tell a good story there personally yet. And there are lots of amazing game studios that tell an amazing story, but I don't think it's that. It's not a video game. It's not a film. But it's something.
It's this new space.
Yeah.
Very cool. As you say, that's the role of an artist, is to try to reach up through the ether and try to grasp at what's next. And then I really liked what you said at the very start, where it's the real art is then bringing that down into reality and finding a way to make it work. Final question, Graham. What are you excited about in the industry for the future? And then you personally, what are you excited about these days, and what are you looking forward to doing?
Good questions. I mean, I'm really excited by Studio Ulster and just it opening and seeing what's possible in that space. And I think that's really really fun. So just having a new virtual production space to play with. I think it's like, that's to me one of the exciting parts, is the R&D lab and the core of that, and just a place to play and a place for people to come and experiment with the tools that are of the highest caliber. So that's exciting in the industry, definitely here. That's hugely exciting. For me personally, I'm really excited discovering this place again with my family, coming back. We feel like tourists again, and there's so much richness here, like being able to go from the city to the beach to the forest, up mountains. Like, I didn't know none of them existed before I came back this time. We're living on the loch, so we can go out on the water, which we couldn't do before. Like, there's so much richness here and it was like going away to come back really gave me the lens to see it in a new way. Like the number even of independent coffee, like where I lived in upstate New York, I could not get an independent coffee. I could only get a Dunkin' Donuts coffee within like, I mean, there was one town that had some coffee shops, but it's just like the volume of independent.
Yeah, America's really like that. It's just like chain.
Yeah. So
crazy.
There's so much goodness here. There's so much difference here. There's so many people doing things. It's really great.
Awesome. What is Futurescape?
Futurescape is a collaboration of people trying to write some of these new stories. And so that's something I'm working on at the minute with a number of people. So I'm excited to see where that goes. It's quite early stages at the minute. But there's a number of exciting things that are coming in that sense. And I think as well, my wife's working in an amazing space called Spring Wells, which is taking solar power and creating a hot movement space that has never been done before. And the guy even who's making that solar space is an engineer who's making these solar generators here. So there's so many like new exciting things happening here. It's really fun.
Awesome. Great, man. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you to NI Connections for making this whole series possible. Like we said at the top of the show, you can sign up to their free email newsletter to find out more at niconnections.com. And other than that, Daniel, thank you so much for producing. And thank you so much for listening. Cheers.